I am.
Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We'd love to know who you guys are and who came. So if you could drop your name and if applicable, the organization or group that you're a part of in the chat, that would be great. Please remain muted until our Q&A section at the end of the presentation. We're going to get started at 5:05 as we let more people trickle in. Thank you, Selena and Josephine. Glad that you guys are here.
Good afternoon. This is Jean Alexander. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. I'm not in my office today. I hope you guys are not in your office.
No, we are not.
There was too much snow in front of my building to even cross the street. Well, now that we're all warm inside, I guess we're just going to wait for the meeting to start, and hopefully we would have a very productive meeting while we're nice and warm.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
We have some more people coming in. Thank you guys for joining. Just as a reminder, we'd love for you guys to introduce yourself in the chat. So please drop your name and the organization that you're a part of, if applicable. This is a great space to network and connect with others, so feel free to engage in the chat and start making connections. I do ask that you please remain muted until the Q&A part of our presentation. Questions can be asked in the chat throughout, and we'll have our staff be paying attention to the chat. But when the Q&A portion starts, feel free to raise your hand as well, and that is when you're be able to unmute. We're going to get started at 5:05 as we let more people come in.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your tardy. Oh, sorry. Thank you for being on time. I am still in the midst of traveling, so I'm going to be in and out of this meeting. You're in good hands with Natasha. She knows a lot about the grants because she handles them in my office. So welcome.
Thank you guys for joining. We're going to get started at 5:05 as we let more people come in. Please remain muted and make sure to drop your information, like your name and your organization, in the chat just so that we know who's attending. We're going to get started in 2 minutes, everybody.
Good evening, Natasha.
Good evening. Okay, we're going to get started. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So this is the grant information session. My name's Natasha Edwards, and I'm the legislative director for the office of Assemblywoman Chantel Jackson. She will be in and out as she is in transit, but she will introduce herself likely towards the end of the presentation. Before we get started, I'll briefly introduce her on her behalf. So, she is the chair of the Legislative Black Task Force, the Legislative Women's Caucus, and the Subcommittee on Micro Businesses. So these grants and community events are very important to her. Since she has come into office, she has awarded almost $2 million in discretionary funding and almost $6 million in capital funding from her discretionary and capital money pots. In 2025, she secured $10 million in operational and capital funding, which went to Mitchell-Lamas that are within the 79th district. Before we get started, I just want to lay down some ground rules. Please remain muted throughout the presentation. There will be a portion for Q&A after I am done giving my presentation, but please put your questions in the chat and we will have our staff monitor it so that all questions can be answered at the end during our Q&A portion. If you don't have a question in the chat, you'll be able to use the raise your hand feature as well. If any of your questions are not answered, there will be a Q&A document that's sent at the end where we will answer any unanswered questions. And if I am speaking too quickly, which sometimes I have a habit of doing, please just drop it in the chat and my staff will let me know on our end to slow down. So just give me a second while I start sharing my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So like I said, I'm Natasha Edwards. Thank you guys for joining. I'm the legislative director for the office. My office contact is right there on the screen. If any of your questions are not answered during our time together, please email me at the email there or call the number on the screen between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. I'll leave that on the screen just for a little bit longer in case you guys want to write those down, but also everything will be sent at the end of this presentation as well. Okay, so for our agenda today, we will be going over a overview of the budget timeline. Then we will talk about how to request funding, funding requirements, the types of grants that you can receive from our office, the statewide financial system, which is necessary for the grant process, the sponsoring agencies who administer this funding, and just a general overview of the grant process itself. When we're talking about these grants, just please note that there's no standard grant process, and every agency and member handles grants differently. So we're going to be talking from the perspective of our office, but I am sure that mostly everything can be applied to other offices as best practices. So first, I want to go over the overview of the budget with you guys. Knowing the budget is important because discretionary funding is due 5 days after the budget passes, so it's important to know kind of the area that we're talking about here. So the first step of the budget process is that the governor submits an executive budget at the end of January. This year, it was the 21st, if I'm remembering correctly. And this acts as a representation of the governor's priorities for the fiscal year. It's essentially the governor putting their money where their mouth is. The budget is considered a policy document as it puts money towards services and programs that the governor prioritizes. And keep in mind, we're talking about the executive budget here, because in step two, the New York State chambers create a budget for each house, the Assembly and the Senate, and we call those the one house budgets, where they request funding for nonprofit organizations, state-funded programs, and certain legislation in some cases. And then we move on to step three, where budget negotiations begin. And before budget negotiations in February, we have our budget hearings, where agency personnel and other elected officials on the city and local level will come up and advocate for funding that they feel like they need. And it also gives a chance for the state elected officials to ask questions of the agency personnel. But in March, official budget negotiations begin to discuss the final New York State budget, which is a culmination or compromise between the executive budget and the two one House budgets. The budget is meant to pass on April 1st, although budget extenders can be passed to extend the budget deadline. And surprisingly, to some of you, as some of you may not know this, during the periods that the budget deadline is extended, state legislators are not paid. For step four, once the budget is passed, New York State operates within this budget until the next budget is passed for the next fiscal year. So let's get into some of the funding requirements that are necessary for you to receive funding from our office. There are preliminary requirements from the legislature, and then there are additional requirements that are required from the sponsoring agencies, and we'll get into who those sponsoring agencies are further in this presentation. So for the legislature requirements, you have to be registered as a nonprofit with New York State Department of State. And then you have to claim an employee identification number or an IEN with the Internal Revenue Service, which is the IRS. And then you have to be registered as a 501(c)(3) organization, which is a legal term essentially for a nonprofit organization. For the sponsoring agencies themselves, you also have, on top of these requirements that we talked about for the legislature, have to be registered on the state financial system or SFS, which we will talk about in a little bit more in depth later. You have to be pre-qualified on that same system. You have to have an established vendor ID number and programming receipt which will be used for your reimbursement for these grants. Also, I want to note, don't feel like you have to write everything down. There will be materials that has everything that I'm talking about. They'll be circulated after this presentation ends. So let's go a little bit into how to request the funding itself. Like I said, this is standard for our office, but I'm sure this is best practice for every other office as well. You want to send a one-pager to the office that you're requesting from, detailing information about your organization. And this should include the organization's legal name, the address of the organization, the phone number, and best point of contact for whoever will be handling the grant themselves, the email, purpose of the funding, the amount that you're requesting, your IEN, and any additional background information about the organization that you think would be helpful for the office to understand the organization itself. So let's get into the type of grants that you can receive. I'm going to call them capital or legislative throughout this presentation, although for the legislative grants specifically, you may hear legislative grants be referred to as programming grants or resolution funding from other offices. Just please know that they are all the same thing. For capital grants, those are typically used for renovation or physical structure improvements. They can also be used for the purchase of equipment. So let's say, for example, you are starting a computer lab. The purchase of the computers and the equipment for that lab would be considered capital funding. Other examples of capital funding or are buying the building that you currently operate out of or renovating the structures that you currently operate out of. This funding can technically, and the keyword is technically, be awarded for up to $1 million, although for our office at least, and most offices, $1 million is not typically allocated from personal assembly or Senate capital funding pots because we are typically only awarded $1 million per fiscal year. So it is the more likely number that we typically give out is anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 for capital grants. Typically, because of this, capital grants do not cover the entirety of a project, so it is likely that if you're looking for funding, you would need supplementary funding on top of that from either another office or another avenue through an agency. And both of the type of grants that we're going to talk about are reimbursement. The money is not given upfront. For legislative grants, these are project-based. So they are typically used to help fund the expansion, maintaining, or creation of a program. So if you have an after-school program and you want to add a section to the program that allows for STEM education, that would be programming funding. We technically can give up to $250,000 worth of this funding, although our office specifically, because we typically only receive about $250,000 in programming or legislative funding a year, we typically give between $10,000 to $50,000. This technically can cover the entirety of a program, but if you have a large program, you may need to have other supplementary funding. And like I said, both are reimbursement. Both types of grants are a reimbursement and typically take up to a year to complete. However, the timeline depends on the grantees filling out their paperwork and sending it back in a timely manner, as well as the grantee's ability to maintain frequent communication with the agency. I will stress this throughout the presentation, but it is extremely important if you are going to apply and receive a grant from our office or any other office that you maintain frequent communication with us and with the sponsoring agency. It is also imperative that you are extremely communicative, specifically through your email. All, most, if not all, communications are going to happen through email for these grants. If you miss an email or if you don't communicate, these grants are going to remain outstanding and can become closed if you don't frequently check and answer your emails from the sponsoring agencies. Grantees receive their reimbursement by sending copies of their receipts to the appropriate sponsoring agency, and that is how you are reimbursed. So make sure to keep track of all of your spending for these grants. So when I'm talking about sponsoring agencies, what am I talking about? For legislative grants, there are several different sponsoring agencies. And why I say sponsoring agencies is because even though the discretionary legislative or capital funding is coming on behalf of our office, that money is coming specifically or is reimbursed by these sponsoring agencies. So we have the Office of Children and Family Services, the Office of Aging, the Office of Mental Health, the New York State Education Department, the Division of Criminal Justice, and the Department of Health, as well as occasionally our Parks Department. That is specifically for legislative grants, or like I said, otherwise known as programming or resolution funding. For capital grants, these specifically come from DASNY or the Dormitory Authority of the state of New York, and that is the only place where capital funding will come from, at least for the Assembly and the Senate. So when I was talking about the statewide financial system, or otherwise previously known as Grants Gateway combined with the statewide financial system on January 16th, 2024. The website, which is listed below here, contains in-depth information about the legislative grant process. Grantees use this system to register for grants, become pre-qualified, which is necessary to receive your reimbursement, manage a contract, and track their progress. Excuse me. And this website is only used for legislative grants. Capital grants go through a little bit of a different process. So let's talk specifically about the legislative grant process. So once organizations request funding from our office and we decide to move forward with this funding, we nominate organizations for discretionary funding to the Assembly Ways and Means Committee by uploading the information that you provided to us through the Assembly's grant portal. The Assembly Ways and Means Committee and the Majority Counsel's Office reviews the nominated organization's information and makes sure that they are eligible and a good fit for a legislative grant. If the committee is unable to verify an organization's status, they will request additional documentation, which is helpful on our end for you to provide upfront, which is a certificate of incorporation, a 990 tax filing form, and a Char 500. Please note that this does not apply to schools, as their funding goes through the New York City Board of Education. Obviously, we're talking specifically about New York City schools here. When putting their information in the grants portal, you can list the full name of the school and the New York City Board of Education's tax ID number. Once Ways and Means approves the grant, they will begin the implementation of the contractual paperwork, which we call the Legislative Initiative Form, or the LIF. Once that form is completed, they send this paperwork over to the sponsoring agency so a grant contract can be opened. The sponsoring agencies then make sure organizations complete the rest of the necessary steps and paperwork that is needed. So that includes becoming pre-qualified, receiving an award letter, establishing and managing a contract, making a claim for payment, and eventually receiving your funding. The capital grant process differs a little bit. So once organizations request funding from our office and we decide to move forward with that, we nominate similarly organizations for capital funding to the Assembly Ways and Means Committee by uploading their information through the Assembly Grants portal. For schools, NYCHA buildings, and parks, the grants will go through the New York City Board of Education or the New York City Housing Authority or the New York City Parks and Recreation. Therefore, the process is a little bit different for you all, and if that applies to you, please just reach out to me after this presentation. Ways and Means will review the organization's information to make sure they are eligible, and once Ways and Means approves the organization, they will issue a blank preliminary application to be shared with the grantee and the speaker's acknowledgement letter to our office. Once the preliminary application is completed, it's reviewed by Ways and Means, and then it is sent to DASNY for approval. As you can see, the process is a bit more antiquated for these capital grants. And once DASNY approves the application, they will send the project to the Department of Budget for approval. Once the Department of Budget approves the project, they will send over the grants disbursement agreement for the grantee to complete the document and send back to them. After all of that, once DASNY approves and officially executes the document, the grantee has the opportunity to withdraw their funding. And before I move on to this about SFS, I want to please stress that this process, both legislative and capital funding, is a reimbursement process, like I said before, so that requires you to be able to pay the money up front and then be reimbursed. So for the state financial system, or SFS, the grant process can be very hard to navigate. So when it comes to the state financial system, us as individual Assembly and Senate offices do not have oversight of SFS. So there's only so much that we can do. If you have issues with pre-qualification or any other concerns, if you become a grantee, please utilize the email below. So I'm going to try and make this last bit a little bit more interactive. Some of these questions were answered throughout the presentation, so it's more of a refresher, and some of them you might just have to guess. But my first question for you all, and you can put your answers in the chat, is what is an appropriate amount of funding to request from an individual assembly member for a legislative grant? And you guys can put those answers in the chat. Okay, most of you are getting this right. The answer is going to be B. So all legislative offices are different, and it's not completely unheard of for somebody to give their entire budget to a specific program, but typically, legislative or programming grants range from $10,000 to $50,000, and typical grant awards range from 100. Typical capital grant awards range anywhere from $100,000 to $500,000. Next question for you guys. What is the most important factor in the speed of a grant's execution? Okay, most of you are getting this right as well, and I know I stress this, but it's all of the above. It is extremely important for you guys to remain communicative, and like I mentioned briefly before, having all of your documents prepared and ready makes it even more easy on our side as we can just give those documents instead of having to chasing you down for them. Give those documents to the sponsoring agency, put you guys in communication as quickly as possible, and then the grant process should be smooth as long as you remain communicative. Next question. How long does the grant process typically take, considering that you remain communicative with the sponsoring agency? Good job, guys. You get an A plus for today. It's going to be around a year. Grants, if all information is provided in a timely manner, will typically take up to a year to process. However, every agency is different, and especially if you are a NYCHA development who is requesting these funds or a school, it may be longer as it goes through more agencies to have this funding come down and be reimbursable. But to ensure a smooth process, please remain in frequent contact with your grant sponsoring agency. Next question. When should discretionary requests be submitted to our office? And I don't think I mentioned this before, so you guys can guess. Most of you guys are getting this right as well. The answer is going to be as early as possible. Yes, I mentioned that the budget passes April 1st, so on a technicality, that is also correct. You want it to be there by April 1st, but we want to be done and approving these grantees before the budget is meant to pass. So legislative or programming grant nominations are due shortly after the passage of the budget, so 5 days. Our office prefers to have requests as early as possible so that they can be reviewed before the chaos of budget season. For the Office of Assemblymember Jackson specifically, please submit your request by the end of January or as early as possible. However, every office is different, so if you're applying for legislative grants from another office, we would recommend also submitting your request as early as possible during the year. However, ensure if anything, that they are there before April. Capital grants technically have no due date, but we would prefer to have these received by the beginning of July so that we can sort through them through the summer and have them done by the end of the year, but we can put those in as early as possible. So January is just as fine as later in the year when it comes to capital grants. Thank you guys again for joining. This is the end of my presentation specifically, and we're gonna go into questions and answer. But we have taken note of all of your questions in the chat that have not been answered, and we'll answer anything that continues to not be answered, and an FAQ document that will be sent tomorrow to all attendees, along with a document detailing all of the information that was in this presentation. But we can move on to question and answer. So just give me a second and let me check on what questions were asked, if any. Okay, we don't seem to have any questions in the chat. If any of you have any questions, you can raise your hand. Okay, I see one question. If a nonprofit is not physically located within the district but serves residents of the district, are they still eligible to request discretionary funding through your office? The answer is technically yes. Obviously, we prefer to or want to serve organizations that are within our district, but we have given funding to um, community organizations that may not be located specifically in district, but do serve our district greatly. My advice is to give the is to submit the application and the one pager regardless so that we can review it. It's better to send it to us than to not have it at all. And I see that the assembly member is raising your hand. Assembly member, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, just to that question, I like for us to be on target. So even if it's a organization that it doesn't exist inside the district but can serve the district, and are willing to do the things that I focus on, that's what's important to me and can execute. So like a lot of people have great ideas, but if you can't execute, then that's this is why I'm in a situation where I'm constantly looking for nonprofits to fund. And I have very specific areas that I care about, and it's like entrepreneurship, health and wellness. Uh, I don't even know what do I care about, Natasha.
Entrepreneurship, health and wellness, education, housing, children and families, financial literacy, and we also are trying to get our community cleaned up. So,
Yeah.
anything that has to do with neighborhood cleanups, helping people with their apartment cleaning, anything like that.
Yep. So yeah, I think being on target of like what I care about is helpful for my office, and the same thing for every other member who is going to give out discretionary funds. Like just t- know what they care about, and then make sure your nonprofit does that kind of work.
You're muted. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I see something pertaining to advances. If the budget's approved, what is the percentage? Um, I know that they're technically for capital grants, there is a possibility that you could be advanced a certain percentage of the grant, but I'll have to get back to you on what that specific percentage is, unless the assembly member remembers it, because I think she answered this question last time.
Percentage on discretionary funding,
For capital, there is you for
25%.
yeah. So
But
there
don't be expecting it because
yes.
sometimes it does not come through. Okay, every year is
Yes.
different. So, but
That's
that's
what
what it's been
I'm
in the past.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to get to. So, technically, there is a possibility for you to receive a certain percentage of the reimbursable funds up front, but I would not rely on that as sometimes it does not come through just due to the bureaucratic nature of the people who are giving you this funding. So I would advise you to make sure that you have the money up front in some capacity so that you can pay for the renovations or anything that has to do with capital funding up front and then be reimbursed for that. Um, what if you just became exempt 7 months ago and have not done a 990 as of yet? Um, if you don't have a 990, I don't believe you're allowed to that paperwork is necessary to receive a grant. So you could always submit it to us, and I could always ask our Ways and Means department. But just based off of the past, you've always need to have your 990 filing form. So I would wait until you receive your first one, and if anything, send in the one pager and we'll review and we'll ask our Ways and Means department on your behalf. What is the website or email where you can request funding? All requests should go to me, the legislative director for the office, and I am dropping my
But
email.
don't we have a Google form?
Yes, sorry. We do have a Google form as well, and I will make sure that Naya has that in our link tree.
Yeah.
Um,
And we could drop it here. We have
okay.
a capital request and then we have a discretionary request. Two different requests.
Yes. So we have those forms, and if we don't drop them in here, they will be sent as well after this presentation. The links to our both of our forms, capital and legislative, as well as our Q&A, answering all of your questions that didn't get answered here, and as well as from our last session, as well as a document with all of the information from this presentation will all be sent afterwards. But you can fill out that form, which will be given to you in some capacity after. Can these grants be used to start a nonprofit? These grants cannot be used to establish a nonprofit. You have to already be established as a nonprofit. And just to reiterate the question, it was, can these grants be used to start a nonprofit, or does one have to have an established nonprofit? Answer is you have to have an established nonprofit organization.
Can I piggyback off of that real quick?
Sure.
Sure. So how about if you have a nonprofit organization, but you're not really doing nothing with it? You just filed the 1099, but you have like a LLC, but your funding
Hmm.
is coming from there. But I'm hearing like reimbursement.
Hmm.
Like, can I front the money and then give reimbursed for the nonprofit, but don't use the nonprofit money like for personal, like use it really like for nonprofit? I'm sorry. It goes into like what was my question in the chat, but I just like it was
So,
tied
uh,
into that one.
okay, I'm trying to sorry, can you ask that one more
More
time?
time. So I funded a nonprofit for after school. I wanted to
Hmm.
get into like DYCD grants and RFPs, but their grants is like so tedious, and the same thing with the reimbursement process.
Hmm.
But y'all reimbursement is like 50,000. Okay, like I made like a little bit like 80,000 in profit this year from an LLC. So I'm saying
Hmm.
like if I take that LLC money and like let's say if I donate 50,000 to the nonprofit, can
Oh,
I apply for the
we can't advise in that. That
Yeah.
all
okay.
we know is that
Okay.
the nonprofit needs to have the money up front. How in which it does it, I can't advise you guys on that.
Yeah. So what I mean, if you have those questions, the best course of action would probably be well, you can send in the one pager, and then our Ways and Means department would probably have the best answer for that. But all that we know is that you have to have the money up front to be able to pay so that you can be reimbursed. I'm unsure about the answer of if there are technicalities and where the money has to come from.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. What about helping people with disabilities? If you have a nonprofit that helps people with disabilities, that's great. Send over the one pager and we'll take a look. There technically is no, I see how long do nonprofits have to be in existence. Um, you typically don't have to, there's no necessarily like an amount of time that you have to exist, but you have to exist long enough to have all of the paperwork to give to us to be funded.
Wait, and just on the disability, I'm not sure if the question was if we want to work with nonprofits that do work with people with disabilities. It's not like one of my main focuses, but that doesn't mean that we won't do it. And I think it's more important to find members who focus on that. Like maybe start at the committee who the members who are on the committee of disabilities. And I know they would have an interest in those nonprofits. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I'm piggybacking off of the assembly member. It's important, as she as she alluded to before, make sure that when you're requesting from an assembly member or a senator, that you know what their priorities are. If you see that they sit on the committee for disabilities, like the assembly member said, it's probably best to send over that um, request to that assembly member or senator. And same goes for every other topic. And I will have the assembly member's priorities for what she is looking to fund this year also in the follow-up document.
We have a hand raised, Natasha.
Yes, I see it. Nakiba, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes, you did. Good evening.
Hi.
Um, so maybe I missed it. So I have a nonprofit. It's a multi-trauma support group, virtual multi-trauma support group for women. So in the mental health sector.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been formed about now going on 5 years in March. Um, I've done some programming here and there. So with with applying for the discretionary, does it have to be based on like putting on programming for the amount that we're requesting? I heard something about that you need to have the money up front. Was that for the other, I guess, grant? I'm just a
Yeah.
little confused.
So, when saying that you have to have the money up front, that it has to do with both legislative or programming grants and the capital grants. And that is what makes things a little bit difficult, especially for smaller nonprofit organizations. But you do have to have the money up front or have the ability in some capacity to pay for the program itself and then be reimbursed for the funding. You have to essentially spend the money down and whether that be for funding the program, for creating a program, maintaining the program, you have to spend that money before you can be reimbursed for the program itself. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so basically the discretionary is a reverse reimbursement grant. Okay, got it.
Yes, both legislative and capital, both are reimbursement grants. Yes.
And it's, Natasha's using the word legislative, and I use the word discretionary. We're talking about the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. As I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, resolution funding, discretionary funding, programming funding, and legislative funding, all the same thing. I know it gets confusing. Let me make sure I'm not missing any questions. Hmm. Somebody said that they were curious about project implementation timeline. Should projects also start with the fiscal year, or do projects start upon contract execution? Okay. So when it comes to that, um, so for example, this year's like award letters for the grant process to start happen later than last year. So I can't necessarily give you a specific project implementation timeline, but what I can say is that what grantees will typically do is wait to spend down the money until they receive the award for the grant itself, and then start with that so that they kind of have more assurance that they will be reimbursed. Because, like I said, when we submit a nomination, we have to make sure that it's approved by our Ways and Means Department and so on and so forth. So I would say that the project implementation timeline would be to first get your award letter and then begin spending that money down so that you have more security that you'll be reimbursed. I hope that answers your question. Um,
Natasha, someone asked about the one pager. Can you explain that further? What should be included?
the one pager, yeah, for sure. So the one pager should have the organization's legal name, the address of the organization, as well as the best point of contact for the grant itself. And I say for the grant itself because if the person who's going to be handling the grant is different from the person that you put down on the form, a lot of stuff is going to get lost in translation. So, best point of contact for the grant, that would include phone number and email, as well as the name and position, the purpose of the funding itself, and the amount that you're requesting, the IEN, and any additional background information that is necessary for us to further understand your organization and what you guys do and where you are located. I have a couple more questions on here. Are churches qualified? Yes, as long as you're have a nonprofit associated with you.
I have
Um,
definitely funded a few churches, Union Grove, Gethsemane, and Salvation Baptist. So yes.
and Would love to have a list of or calendar of potential programs that you're interested in. The assembly member and I can work on that so that people have a better, like I said, I will include in the follow-up document the priorities that the assembly member has and what she likes to fund. And if you guys send over something that we think will be better with another assembly member, we will definitely let you guys know that so you can push that request to another assembly member or senator. I see quite a few questions just asking if we'd be interested in specific programs. I just ask that you submit the request and we will let you know if we are interested in it, just so I'm not going through each of them individually.
We have a hand raised, Camille.
Yes, Camille, go ahead.
Hi, good day. Thank you, Assembly Member, for hosting this, and thank you, Natasha, for doing such an excellent job. I
Thank
think
you.
I've been on a lot of discretionary hearings, and I think it's one of the best ones. I love it, and I love the activities. But my question is, so I am, I have a not-for-profit that was started in New Jersey.
Mhm.
However, I did a foreign application. I have received discretionary funding from the Assembly before and from the City Council. The discretionary came from an assembly that I'm not in the district, but they funded because I do a lot of work in the district. Long story short is I see that there's now a lot of initiative that the member focus on, like, and then I dropped it in the chat, like health and wellness and youth and housing. Those are some things that I love to be a part of. However, I think it needs to be like who's the best person to schedule a offline conversation because I am interested. The only thing is that we founded in New Jersey, but we got most of our funding in Brooklyn, New York. But then we do things in the Bronx, in Pennsylvania, in Harlem, in Queens. Like we go wherever community is. Like my model is our organization is called Find Community Connection Project. So wherever there's a need for community, we are going to be there in every way. But what's always an issue is always space. And my organization, we push civic engagement. So we're always trying to find elected official who is for getting youth more involved when it comes to civic engagement. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. As long as you do programming in the Bronx, I'll drop my email in the chat, and this goes for everybody else. If you want to schedule a meeting and we have the time for it on our calendar, you can reach out to that email and we can set up a meeting offline to discuss further. Um, and just reach out with the purpose of the meeting, and your availability. Yeah, so I'm gonna take one more question. Um, if I haven't answered your question, I am looking at all of them. It may just mean that I have to look into some stuff, look into more information before I answer them. So if I didn't answer your question, um, I will definitely answer your question in the paperwork that we will, or the documents that we will send after this presentation ends. Please expect the documents either tomorrow or the day after. If it comes the day after, that just means that there was some extra research I had to do to answer some of your guys' questions. Like I said, it will include the answers to questions that didn't get answered here, as well as the answers to questions that we got in our last grants workshop, a document form of the presentation that I gave and the information for the office and the links to our Google Forms that you could submit to request funding from our office. If the
Can you
assembly
plug
member wants to
the
hop on
Yeah,
and
I just wanted to plug that we also, because I'm chair of the Black Task Force, we for the first time got $30 million for our nonprofits that help underserved communities. And so we are looking to get more funding for that this year as well. So some of you may have applied for that money and you haven't heard back. It's because I haven't heard back yet who got it accepted. But just be on the lookout that we're going to need you guys to help us with Advocacy Day. And we're going to be asking for $90 million this year. So hopefully, you guys can help us with advocating for it and applying. You guys can apply for it, and that'll maybe settle some of the things that I personally cannot do. And that's all I need to say. I'm going to go into the parking lot now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Natasha. And thank you,
yes,
Team Jackson.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Like I said, if your questions didn't get answered, they will get answered offline. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something at least. And we will keep you guys updated via social media and via email about other workshops that we may have throughout the year. Thank you again. And please see in the chat for our office information. And if you have any questions about specifically the Black Legislative Task Force funding, Dorcia just placed her email in the chat. It'll also be sent out afterwards with the follow-up documents. Thank you guys. Have a great evening and stay safe with the snow.
Thank you, team.
Thank you, Chantel, for all you do.
Thank you. That Principal Torres?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna set up the person. Just reach out
Yep.
to whoever you talk to in my office normally. Is it Crystal? All right, hit them up because we'll set that up, okay?
All right, no problem. And if you're around Friday, you know I have the ribbon cutting with Jazz from the Yankees,
Yeah.
Jazz Chisholm.
Yes.
To bring the baby.
I know. I know.
Yeah. I'll see you later, right, Ma? Be safe.
Be safe, everybody.
Bye.
Mm.